That's at the very bottom of the Great Depression. People were far more demoralized than they were mobilized. And within 2 years, the face of the country had changed utterly. And Roosevelt didn't do that. He didn't do that. He followed that. He followed that. 1934, for example, was a year of the Minneapolis General Strike and the San Francisco General Strike, and a strike throughout the whole textile industry of nearly 500,000 workers, and so on and so on and so on. Why, I don't know. Each case and each instance has it, but people had had enough, as they did there. So my feeling is that there is a point where that fantasy becomes no longer believable. No longer commands the legitimacy. The notion about the CEO, look, normally our society, we're not a warrior culture. We make plenty of war. We're not a warrior culture. We're like into business. As Calvin Coolidge once said, the business of America is business. Right? That's our claim to being a civilized country, and there's something to be said for that. Not as much, I think, as Coolidge thought. We don't have romantic heroes. The closest we come, we used to have generals and so on. Who is the businessman? The businessman is hero. He's the pathfinder. He's the innovator. He's daring, audacious. He has eyes that penetrate right through you. He's a rough, tough customer, right? He's our kind of romantic hero. We inflate this picture of him. Of the guy with the tight eyes, like Edward Steichen's picture of J.P. Morgan that hangs in the Metropolitan Museum, right? Tight eyes. Okay, when the economy is flourishing and so on, one can indulge that notion. When the economy is flat on its back and people's lives are being ruined, it's much harder. And that's why there is such... Occupy Wall Street is very popular. That we all know. It's very popular. It's not like, say, the 60s, let us say, where especially, say, about questions of imperialism, the Vietnam War, and so on, the country was viewed about as a lot of hostility directed. Here, there's enormous support because that romance is over with for the moment. That belief system is over with. I think, we'll see. Yes. In the back, in the very back.
Comment and a question.
Yeah.
Refer to your question. I think that despite the discontent, there still is a tremendous amount of reverence for wealth in this country.
Yeah.
And I think a good deal of it is coming from advertising and television. When you think of the irony of the quote-unquote reality shows. All the reality shows are of people living in big mansions and going on shopping sprees whenever they get depressed and that sort of thing. So that's the model, and I think a lot of people, whatever they may say, they think they may be changing in their thinking. There is still stuck, particularly probably in the younger generation, a real idolizing and reverence of the wealthy. So that's a comment. The question I have, you brought up the strike that happened in Roosevelt's time.
Yeah.
I know that the air controllers strike under Reagan's watch clearly put, a lot of fear into people. But why do you think it is that we have so few strikes in this country? And why don't we have, like, a big general strike? People are willing to occupy. But why won't they all just say, we're not going to work together and really stop it?
Okay, let's do this tomorrow. I think that's a great question.
Yeah.
It's a very hard one to answer. It has to do, in part, I think, with the financialization of the economy, which deindustrialized it. By deindustrializing it over the course of 20 or 30 years, and still going on today, you destroyed or made grow anemic what had been the single most powerful social and democratic movement in the country, the labor movement. Whole regions were wiped out. Towns became ghost towns. People's lives were turned upside down. They entered a kind of down escalator of downward mobility. And the institutions that they had built, that conducted those strikes that you're recalling, either were destroyed or went deeply on the defensive, engaged in a long period of concessionary bargaining just to hold on. The assault of the business community, beginning really in the 1970s, but accelerating after the Patco strike, to whittle away at and then just totally ignore the basic provisions of the National Labor Relations Act. There practically are no unfair labor practices that a corporation can commit anymore. I mean, there's just almost everything is allowed. There's a little change now. Obama has appointed good people to the NLRB, so some change in that. But so that's at least a piece of that story. I think this consumer culture that depoliticizes things is another piece of that story about why we don't think collectively, why look, it's not just now. It's not just recently. Here's the point I want to make. What you say is, of course, true. There's still a tremendous amount of idealization of the things you referred to. But you know what? That was always true. That was always true. There's a movie I'm very fond of called There Will Be Blood. And I don't know if somebody saw it. But it depicts a character who is often been, he becomes psychopathic, but he's the psychopathic extreme of that kind of D.H. Lawrence American male hero, and a figure to whom the kind of conquistador businessman often conforms. An isolate, steely, nerveless, no affective ties, ruthless, and so on. And that has always been admired. I wrote a book called Every Man a Speculator. That remark that's a quote. I didn't invent that phrase. That was said by a diarist in antebellum America, sort of commenting on the state of Jacksonian America and how every man was a speculator if he could get away with it, out for the main chance, seeking his own self-improvement, and so on. It made the Jacksonian era a very exciting one for people, but it also was exactly that dream. Nonetheless, and that dream persisted through There Will Be Blood, which is around the turn of the 20th century and on into the present day. But for most of that period of time, there was an alternative dream, or I don't know if I want to call it a dream, an alternative universe which said no, that we don't need or want or can't afford to live like that as isolates. And as I said earlier in my remarks, sometimes that alternative had its way, had its victories. Other times it didn't, but it was always there. What differentiated, I think, our own more recent moment, say from Patco on, was the absence of much of that alternative. And I again think we are. I think we're looking at a long road ahead of us. A good long road ahead of us. We're looking at a bad long road ahead of us, no question about that, but a good one, because I think that those resources are never entirely, that ability to imagine a new world and to act collectively is never dead, and is being reborn now. How long should I go here?
Well, I was wondering myself. I thought somebody was going to tell us. I quarter after. Let's make it.
Okay. Yes.
So as long as we've exported all the jobs out of the country, how are we going to get out of this?
Right. Well, I don't know. We have to. I myself am partial to the notion of reindustrializing as a high-tech industrial economy. Whatever the answer is, we have to control the capital resources that allow it to happen. The public, a democratic society, must have a say over how those resources are invested and distributed. Otherwise, we end up back where we are.
How would you do that?
Well, one way is you occupy Wall Street. Another way is you might build a political party that advocates that. You might pass. Look, there's talk, for example, of turning banks into public, treating them as if they were public utilities. As if they were public utilities. They're responsible for providing a public resource that everybody depends on. So you pass a law. Or you pass various kinds of regulations that penalize banks for, say, investing in speculative, not productive enterprise. I mean, it's an endless discussion, but it can be done. That's my point. It doesn't have to be this way. I'm going to take one more question.
Well, you can't really trust Washington
No.
to implement these great, bold ideas
Yes.
you just outlined. I mean, the next step is Occupy Washington.
Yeah.
The,
Okay.
the best sign that I saw that represents this problem was, how can I buy a politician if I don't have a job?
I've seen a lot of those things. Yeah.
That is critical.
Yeah, and someone said, I can't.
Government, please save it. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
There's a collusion going on, and it is systemic.
Right.
That's why there's no one single point.
There's no one single
Yeah,
point. We're at the beginning of the road.
Let me offer two solutions, though. One is to start thinking long-term instead of short-term. That would solve most of the economic things. I went to the University of Chicago School of Business, okay? I never had an economics or an accounting course in my life before going there, so I went totally green. And what's going on is so different than classic economics, and it has to do with short-term thinking
Everything's
as a
short-term,
problem, and ethics,
Right.
or legalities. Okay? If those two things were in place, capitalism is beautiful.
Okay, thank you very much.